Today we are going to talk about the problem of concentration. Now, some people talk, when they talk about meditation, especially the breathing meditation, they ask people to concentrate on the breathing. And I say that what you have to do is not to concentrate on the breathing, but to be aware of the whole body and relax the body. And to relax is not to do anything, to let go. If you have been holding on to something, you let go of it. But if you begin to concentrate, the mind gets tired of concentration. And when the mind gets tired of concentration, the mind goes to sleep. And if you are not interested in sleeping, then you get into what is called the hypnagogic state. And it is from the hypnagogic state that you enter what is called the hypnotic state. Long time ago, there was a man called Mesmer, Frank Anton Mesmer. He was talking about magnetism and animal magnetism, that human beings also can be magnetized. But what he really did was, he was using people's imagination to produce the hypnotic state. It was later that another doctor from England whose name was Dr. Bread. He was the one who coined the term hypnosis, because he experimented on this same thing and he found that it was not magnetism that is doing it, and his method of producing the hypnotic state was to get a person to concentrate on something. So, this is why that concentration is not the right way to meditate. Our purpose is not to produce the hypnotic state. Our aim is to relax the body and calm the mind. So some people think that samadhi is hypnosis. Samadhi is not hypnosis. Even these people who talk about vipassana meditation condemn samadhi. And they say you should not practice samadhi, you must practice vipassana. But what they do is they get people to concentrate, but they say we are not teaching concentration. But without their knowledge, they are doing concentration. And as a result, they enter the hypnotic state. And by entering the hypnotic state, they begin to talk about vipassana, and ultimately their aim is to produce what they call sotapanna. Sotapanna is translated as entering the stream. And the stream there is what is called the Noble Eightfold Path. But what we are pointing out is that you don't enter the stream that way. That is the wrong method of trying to enter the stream. And so, today, our friend Billy will be talking about this hypnosis and the difference between hypnosis and meditation will be shown to you through the pictures and these ways. So, we'll thank him for that, and I will let him do the talking now.
Good evening, Bhante. Good evening, brothers and sisters. With Bhante's permission, I shall commence this evening's sharing. Before I get into hypnosis and meditation, I would like to show one very important clip which has to do with the meditation you are doing today. That is the metta meditation. So I'll just explain a little bit about what happens in your brain when you do the metta meditation before I get into the hypnosis part. So, if we recall from the presentation a couple of days back, we're talking about the brain having evolved into three distinct layers. The oldest and most primitive is the brainstem, the survival brain that keeps us alive by regulating our body conditions. Then comes the emotional brain called the limbic system. This is a very important word, limbic system. So this is the part of the brain that controls all the biochemical chain reaction in our body, basically delivering the sensation of emotions, sensations of bodily feelings, and so on. And the third part is the most evolved part, which is the cerebral cortex, the thinking brain, or the learning brain. And this is the part of the brain that is very important for developing your intellect, developing your ability to see things in a rational way, your good judgment and wholesome thoughts, and so on. So in this limbic system, the emotional brain, so we'll talk a little bit about the emotional brain because there is a very important part there we all have come across already, called the amygdala, which scans your environmental inputs, and when it detects anything which may be fearful, it triggers the fight or flight reaction. So the amygdala has two important paradoxical roles. The first is to protect the organism from harm, acting as though it's a bodyguard, to detect danger and to protect the organisms from threats and danger. But the other part, if the amygdala is aroused unnecessarily, what happens is that it becomes a terrorist. It makes you fearful, it makes you worry, anxious, makes you feel frustrated, angry, and so on. All the negative emotions. In fact, basically all kinds of emotions, whether we call it positive or negative. So that's what the amygdala does. And it's very important to understand now there is two parts of your brain you have to realize and understand what they are. The first is the amygdala, because this is the part when it is aroused, it causes stress and various disturbances in the body, which subsequently disturb the mind. But the second part is your learning brain or your thinking brain, which is made of 4 lobes. And the most important lobe is the one in the front here, the frontal lobe. It is responsible for attention system, memory, logical thinking. Critical thinking means ability to analyze and be critical about what you see, whether you see it is real or not real, whether it is believable or not believable. And then lateral thinking, which has to do with creativity and imagination, and decision making, goal setting, planning, which are very important functions to bring happiness in your life. And of course, judgment, reasoning, and rationalizing. Out of these functions, the bottom 2 lines are the most critical. Decision making, goal setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, rationalizing. In fact, all the top there, all the functions that I mentioned in the whole list there is done by the frontal lobe. But these last 2 lines, especially rationalizing and all that, is actually performed by this little bit here called the prefrontal cortex, which is just behind your eyebrow. And this is the second part of your brain you have to understand. You don't have to understand how it works, you just understand it is there. And this is the part of the brain that you are actually developing and training when you are doing your meditation. We saw 2 days ago in the video clip that because of evolution of the brain, the emotional brain from the amygdala has very strong connections to the prefrontal cortex, which means the amygdala, when it is aroused, it can send signals to disturb your rational thinking. And yet there are very weak connections going back from the prefrontal cortex to your amygdala. Therefore, you are unable to control your emotions easily under normal circumstances. And this is where meditation comes in. With a learning, proper understanding and practice of meditation, you are actually sharpening this part of your brain. Bhante spoke about it this afternoon, about sharpening the knife. You want to cut something? Before you can cut it, you need to sharpen your knife. So if you want to be able to purify your mind, before you can actually purify your mind, you must sharpen the skills at developing this part of your brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. So what happens when we have aspirations to heal others of suffering? What happens when we begin to have these metta aspirations? So let's take a look at the explanation by these brain scientists. One of the most famous brain scientists is Dr. Richard Davidson. He actually has done a lot of research under the guidance of the Mind and Life Institute, where he has, which is sponsored by the Dalai Lama. And all these research are centered around Buddhist meditation and how Buddhist meditation can help in terms of the development of the mind and what Buddhist meditation can do to the mind. So let's take a look at his explanation here about what happens when we have aspirations of selflessness. That means when we begin to have this metta aspiration, that we want all beings to be well. Now be aware, Bhante has pointed out, just because you aspire all beings to be well, peaceful, comfortable and happy, does not mean all the beings will become well, peaceful, comfortable and happy. You don't yet have that power. But what happens is that when you have the aspiration for all beings to be well, peaceful, comfortable, and happy, that aspiration itself does something wonderful to your prefrontal cortex. So in other words, the practice of aspiration of selflessness, the first party to benefit is the practitioner. The person who aspires all beings to be well is the very first person to benefit from this aspiration.
If we show people this picture and we ask people to have the aspiration that this baby will be healed and will be free from suffering.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
What does that do to the brain to have that kind of aspiration? And it turns out when people adopt that kind of attitude, it changes their brain. And so there's a part of the brain called the amygdala, and that's shown in blue. And that part of the brain is modulated when people wish this baby to be free from suffering, transform the emotion to make it more positive and express compassion. And so there's now good evidence to suggest that the brain changes in response to this kind of training. People differ in how skilled they are at voluntarily regulating their emotions. And when people are better able to regulate their negative emotions, they show less activation in this part of the brain, the amygdala, and it's also associated with more activation in a part of the brain in the prefrontal cortex up here.
So there you have heard his statements. He basically made two major statements about selfless aspiration. The first is that the aspiration to reduce suffering reduces activation in the amygdala. That means if you practice metta meditation, you are naturally helping yourself to become less and less easily aroused by your emotional senses. That means when you sense something in the environment, whether you see, hear, smell, taste, or touch, the feeling is pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, it arouses your emotions. And the arousal leads to reaction. So when you practice metta aspiration, when you practice metta meditation, it helps to reduce the ability for your amygdala to be easily aroused. That means you naturally become a less reactive person. You can train your mind to become more responsive. Responsive means you think about it before you react. Reactive means you react without thinking, just like wild animals. So therefore, the practice of metta aspiration helps to reduce your ability to be aroused, emotionally aroused by the environment. Okay, so this is the first benefit. And then Richard Davidson spoke about the second benefit. And the second benefit is basically mentioning that people differ in different levels of skill. That means every person has a different level of skillfulness in dealing with their emotions. So let's examine his statement in more details. He spoke about skillfulness. So every individual has a different level of skillfulness in down regulation. That means reducing the effect of your emotions. Negative affect. Affect here is referring to your emotional reaction. So, in other words, different people have different skill level at reducing negative emotional reactions. And this, if you practice metta aspiration, you are strengthening your prefrontal cortex so that it will help to reduce the activation of your amygdala, which he spoke about a moment earlier, and then increased activation in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Basically, in the prefrontal cortex, ventromedial basically is just referring to that part which is slightly below just below it, somewhere in the middle. Ventral is below, medial is somewhere in the middle. So that specific part of the prefrontal cortex is being developed and enhanced. In fact, the brain research has become so advanced, they could pinpoint very specifically what kind of meditation can do what to which part of your brain, and it is responsible for what function. This is the part of the brain that is largely responsible for rational thinking and reasoning and judgment. Your ability to form wholesome judgment, rational thinking, and reasoning. Recalling the other day when we saw that video clip about the signs of lust. When lust is engaged and your whole body is reacting to the biochemical reactions of lust, judgment is suspended. See? So practicing this metta meditation helps you to strengthen this part of the brain, as well as reducing the activation of your amygdala. So I hope you understand the benefit. Don't imagine that your metta aspiration is going to heal the world. You're not going to change the world with your metta aspiration. Yeah? So a lot of people think they can. So they get into this 24-hour metta meditation or metta chanting and whatever. But what it is doing is not to other people. It is doing to the practitioner. It is helping the practitioner. So I hope you understand that. At this present level of practice that we are in, we do not have the power by simply chanting or aspiring people to be well. We do not have the power to heal other people like that. Not yet. Okay, so I hope you understand that part of the presentation. So I'm going to move on to the main presentation, which is about meditation or self-hypnosis. There's really very little difference. It really, you don't even realize it. It's very easy for you to fall into a hypnotic state totally without realizing it. I'm going to do that to you in a moment, so you please forgive me if suddenly you realize you have all been hypnotized. Huh? So, quickly, what is hypnosis? I'm not going to go too deep into it, but very briefly, basically, hypnosis requires, when we speak of hypnosis, it has very useful function. It helps to relieve people of depression or emotional problems and get over their emotional hiccups in life. So they become easily reactive and so on. So hypnotherapy is the use of the hypnosis to heal people of these emotional states and depression. Very useful. It works. And initially, it is even faster than using meditation, but not for long term. Initially, it is faster, but in the long term, meditation has greater effect and benefit. So when we speak about hypnosis, the person must be in this relaxation posture, sitting back with the back leaned against something, resting the whole body, and then the body becomes completely rested. And when the body becomes completely rested, the mind can calm down easily. Naturally, the mind will calm down when the body is rested. So this seating posture helps subjects in hypnotherapy to be able to become more relaxed and calm their mind. And when we speak of hypnosis for relaxation, meaning using hypnotherapy or hypnosis to overcome various emotional states so that you become more relaxed and calm, there are major characteristics. First, the person has to be seated in that relaxed posture, and the calming of the mind happens through suggestions. That means the hypnotherapist makes a lot of suggestions, and then the subject has some positive expectation. When you begin to have positive expectation, expecting something from it, your mind will begin to create the effect for you. And that is how hypnosis can be very effective. When the person expects to benefit, the mind will begin to create the benefit. And this benefit may be real, this benefit may actually be a placebo effect. That means it's basically an imagined one. Whichever way it is, it still helps the person become more calm. And if the person engages in self-talk and affirmation, that means speaking to yourself with positive words or using mantra, that helps also. And if you begin to imagine and visualize images in your mind, creating images of, you're sitting in a peaceful place, somewhere in the park, where you have beautiful trees and garden and flowers and the birds, and then you feel yourself very relaxed. So if you go through that process, it even enhances the effects further. Okay? Some of you might be smiling now. You've been doing that every morning at around 6 a.m. Okay? So, all this depends on two things. Suggestions based on projection of memory, imagination, and expectations, and non-critical, non-analytical susceptibility to suggestions with a positive expectancy. That means you no longer criticize what the hypnotherapist is suggesting to you. So the hypnotherapist is suggesting to you, now you find yourself in this garden, beautiful flowers and trees, and you find yourself feeling more and more relaxed. These are all suggestions. With these suggestions, you go deeper and deeper into that relaxation. So that's how hypnosis works. Suggestions. Now, be aware. While I'm speaking of suggestions from a hypnotherapist, suggestions can also arise from within your mind. If before you begin to meditate and you have expectations, you expect something to happen during your meditation, that expectation is recorded in your memory. And that recording in your memory becomes some kind of auto-suggestion if you are not attentive, introspective with your meditation practice. Which means if you have a certain expectation of experiencing something, for example, you have an expectation that when you meditate, you're going to smile. Yeah? Meditation will bring a smile on your face. If you think like that, and when you start to meditate, that thought has been recorded as an auto-suggestion, and before you know it, if you're not introspectively attentive, in other words, you're not paying attention introspectively to what goes on in your mind, that can arise as an auto-suggestion in your subconscious mind, your unconscious mind. Yeah? And that is the emotional mind. And that begins to create a false sense of smiling. And it may even produce a smile on your face. Yeah? So be aware. Before you begin meditation, have no expectations. Very important part. So hypnosis works because of suggestions and because of expectations. Once you follow suggestion and you have expectations, you are into hypnotic state easily, guaranteed. I'm going to make it happen to you in a moment. You don't know it yet, but it's going to happen to you. So what is hypnotic induction? Hypnosis came from the word hypnos. Hypnos is the Greek god of sleep. Basically what hypnosis does is that it puts people deep into sleep. So hypnosis is very useful. Hypnotherapy is very useful to help people who can't sleep. Right? And so if you really have a lot of sleeping problem and you try many different things, please don't take medication. Don't take sleeping pills. If you really can't help yourself and people can't help you, go see a hypnotherapist. A few sessions of that, it might help you learn how to overcome that sleeplessness. Okay? So, induction process in hypnosis is the process of inducing this hypnotic effect. So what is this hypnotic effect? It is your susceptibility to purposeful suggestions. That means when the therapist suggests something to you, you become susceptible to it. You fall into that suggestion easily. You embrace what has been suggested. It is also the non-judgmental and non-critical acceptance of what is suggested. It is very important because in hypnotic state, you no longer criticize what has been suggested. So in other words, if a hypnotherapist is saying that, oh, now you're sitting in a garden and you feel more and more relaxed, and then you ask yourself, no, I'm not sitting in the garden, I'm sitting here in Asoka Hall, so why should I be feeling more and more relaxed? So if you think like that, which is critical thinking, then you are not susceptible to the hypnotic effect, all right? But if you accept what is suggested, then you easily fall into the hypnotic effect. Hypnosis or hypnotic effect is really an experiential attention. That means it's not introspective attention. It is experiential attention. You actually engage in that experience of imagination. As you imagine something, you make yourself feel you are experiencing it. And you begin to project mental imagery, visualization, and your mind goes into what is called lagging attitude. Lagging attitude means your mind is a follower. Following what? Following suggestions. Then these suggestions can arise unconsciously. And these suggestions can be beyond your control if you are not introspectively attentive to your meditation. You are not actually practicing introspection. Then you become a follower of imagination that may arise, auto-suggestion that may arise. That is called lagging attitude. And you go into an altered state of consciousness of guided subjective reality. That means the reality in your mind is guided by whatever your imagination tells you. So this is hypnotic induction. And there are major applications of hypnotherapy or hypnosis. Self-hypnosis, to help yourself feel better or heal yourself. Actually, self-hypnosis is useful in many ways. It can help strengthen your confidence and so many other things. Guided hypnosis means there is a hypnotherapist guiding you as a group or together or whatever. So that is guided hypnosis. Stage hypnosis is what you often see on TV, and this is giving people the wrong idea what hypnosis is all about, because people use the power of hypnosis for show business. So it kind of looks like it's all for fun, and people are made to look like fools on stage. So that is not a very wholesome application of hypnosis. It's just for fun. But then the very powerful application of hypnosis is clinical hypnotherapy. That means people who are suffering from depression, with the help of a clinical hypnotherapist, then that person can be healed of depression and so on. And finally, which is becoming very popular in America, is hypnoanesthesia. The use of hypnosis to put people into a hypnotic state where they don't feel pain, especially when they go for dental surgery, simple surgery. They have even tried it to other type of intrusive surgery. But at the moment, this has not been used in a widespread manner yet. But when people are hypnotized deep into hypnotic state, they might not feel the pain when the dentist is extracting a tooth or something like that. Totally without the use of local anesthesia or local anesthetics. Okay, so these are the major applications of hypnosis. So let's quickly talk about meditation before we compare the two. Basically, you will find this in the Anapanasati Sutra, which is explained very clearly. The Buddha, in his own words, have explained it. The practice of Anapanasati, which is introspective breathing, when it is developed and cultivated, it bears great fruits and brings great benefits. Simple little thing about practicing introspective breathing can help you. When Anapanasati, when it is developed and cultivated, it leads to the fulfillment of the 4 focuses of introspection, satipatthana, which is introversion of attention. When satipatthana is developed and cultivated, it leads to the fulfillment of the satabojjhanga, 7 steps to awakening. And when satabojjhanga is developed and cultivated, it leads to the fulfillment of full consciousness, which is vijja, and emancipation, which is vimutti. At that point in time, you're basically free from the delusion of existence. Vimutti is the liberation, the emancipation from the delusion of existence. So this is what Buddha has actually prescribed to be the full process. that Anapanasati leads to Satipatthana. Satipatthana, when developed and cultivated, leads to Satabhujanga. Satabhujanga, when developed and cultivated, leads to Vijja and Vimutti, when you become fully knowing and emancipated, free, liberated from the dream of existence or delusion of existence. So this is basically the stages of awakening in the case of Buddhist meditation. I'm just going to focus on Buddhist meditation, but I'll touch on another meditation which is very popular in America, which is doing something quite different from Buddhist meditation. It's called transcendental meditation. I'll touch on that later on. So let's focus on Buddhist meditation for now. So when we speak of Buddhist meditation, we need to have this proper posture. Whether you are sitting on the floor, whether you're sitting on the chair, whether you are standing or walking, the back must be straight. If your back is straight, it actually does something. When the back is straight, it sends a signal to the part of the brain called the reticular activating system. The reticular activating system is actually found in the brainstem area. It switches your brain into 3 different modes. The first mode is that when it is aroused, it switches to hyperactivity, which means you go into fight or flight reaction mode. That makes you very emotional. That makes you very reactive. The second mode it switches to is conscious relaxation. This is what I call in the zone. That is when your mind is alert, awake, fully conscious, and yet you are relaxed. So keeping the back straight switches the mind into this conscious relaxation state. The third switch, what the reticular activating system does, the third switch is puts you to sleep, which means hypnotic state. So in other words, if you try to meditate sitting on the chair, leaning on the back of the chair, or sitting by the wall, leaning on your back, leaning on the wall, or sitting by the door and your back is leaning on the door, as long as you're resting your back and not keeping your back straight, you are sending a signal to the reticular activating system to switch it into hypnotic state. You become highly susceptible to hypnosis. So in other words, very important, very, very, very important. I cannot even stop to emphasize how important it is. When you meditate, always keep your back straight. Don't rest on the chair. Don't rest on the wall. Don't rest on the door. Whatever. Don't put cushions on your back. It's okay to put it in the lumbar. That's about it. But not the back. Because straightening your back sends a signal to the reticular activating system to switch it into the alert mode. Conscious relaxation. Then you are able to meditate. When you rest your back, you go into hypnotic state easily. Like that. Yeah? So don't ever do that. So when we speak of meditation, how does it purify the mind? It is conscious relaxation, switches your mind into this state called in the zone. I'll talk about in the zone. I think tomorrow night I'll show a little bit more about in the zone. This conscious relaxation. You're conscious, you're alert, and yet you're relaxed. You're not tensed, okay? And your attention is focused inwards, introversion of attention. By turning your attention inwards, it's withdrawn from sensory objects. That means no longer paying attention to what your senses are telling you. You're no longer paying attention to what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, or what you touch. But if you're leaning your back on the wall, that leaning on the back creates a bodily sensation that makes you go into hypnotic state. So then you're beginning to pay attention to bodily sensation, the sense of touch. Yeah. So therefore, the proper meditation is attention focused inwards, withdrawn from your sensory objects, and attention withdrawn from memory, imagination. Right? They arise. Memory of what happened in the past will arise. Imagination of something that hasn't happened yet could arise. If you have an expectation, it will also arise. So in other words, memory can arise, imagination can arise, expectation can arise. But you train your mind to withdraw your attention from this, right? So you withdraw it by simply observing it arising and just letting it go. Don't pay attention to it, don't deal with it, don't interact with it. When you observe any of this, just let it go and say, okay, that's it. And I teach this in the mindful relaxation workshop. I call that tidapa. You tidapa it away. Yeah. So when this imagination comes up, just let it go. Yeah. And very importantly, switch your mind into this critical factor. I'm going to talk a bit more about critical factor, because below the critical factor is hypnotic state. Above the critical factor is introspection. So switch your mind to this critical factor so that your mind becomes leading. When you meditate, you have a leading mind, not a lagging mind anymore. A lagging mind is one that follows suggestions, follows imagination, follows memory, follows expectations, follows your sensual objects, sensory objects. That is a lagging mind. The leading mind does not follow. The leading mind purely observes. The leading mind is in control. It is observing, not concentrating, observing. There's a big difference between observing and concentrating. I am observing all of you now. I am concentrating now. So, you see the difference? I'm just observing all of you instead of concentrating, okay? So there's no concentration. And it brings you into this altered state of consciousness with this introspective attention. And this level of introspection is when you attain that level called upekkha. And finally, it leads you to the cultivation of wisdom and insight. That is a later part when you practice the more advanced level of meditation. Then you are able to cultivate insight, panya. Ultimately, of course, leading to full consciousness and emancipation, vijja and vimutti. Okay, so basically, this is how meditation works. Now, I'm gonna use this to explain basically what is happening in your mind with meditation, what is happening in your mind when it comes to hypnosis. So let's look at this person looking at the dog. Every experience is dependent on the presence of necessary conditions. So light reflected from the dog enters the eye organ. Right? And from the eye organ, when the person pays attention, process of perception arises, a mental image is formed. So that is what we call an experience. In reality, an experience, that is all there is. There is only, in the experience of seeing, there is only the experience to speak of. The seeing to speak of. Right? But the mind likes to do more than that. It likes to project. Projecting, oh, I saw the dog out there. And in the process of projecting, it creates a process called dichotomy. Dichotomy means is breaking your experience into two parts. One part is subjective. The other part is objective. Subjective is the part that is in the mind and the body. The objective is the part that is outside the mind and the body. And the mind does this automatically with an untrained mind. So when it breaks it into these two parts, we begin to think there is a self and there is a world out there. Now, where does meditation come in? What does meditation focus on? Meditation focuses on the process of perception. In focusing on the process of perception, it is only an introspective attention on the process of perception, observing how we perceive, not what we perceive. Does not pay attention to the object. No mental image, does not pay attention to a mental image, does not pay attention to the stimulus or the sense organ. Basically paying attention to the process of perception. How we perceive, not what we perceive. What about hypnosis then? Hypnosis is playing around with what we perceive. Hypnosis is the interactive engagement with what we perceive. The interactive engagement with this object of perception, the sensory object. You begin to visualize, oh, I'm sitting in this garden, beautiful garden, nice trees, wind, very cool wind blowing, brushing on my face, making me feel more and more relaxed. That is hypnosis, yeah? Similarly, you could fall into this hypnotic state if you're not careful with your introspective attention when you meditate. Your mind begins to drift. You don't realize it, but it can drift, right? So we're going to do a simple little exercise. Some of you have done it before, but please participate along. Yeah, for those of you who've done it before, don't say anything, just play along with it. I would like all of you to participate. When I show numbers, please speak out loud. And you add the numbers. So when I show 1,000, you say 1,000. Okay, all of you follow me. 1,000. When I show you the next number, it is 1,030. Okay, say together, 1,030. Please participate. Okay, next one, 2,030. Please, everybody. Together, huh? Okay, together. 2,070. And so on, okay? So, let's do it properly now, right? Everybody. Good. Wonderful. That's good. 3,070. Right. 3,090. Good. Very good. Very good. But we were a bit slow and a bit too soft. Please participate. You can break your noble silence for once. Are you ready? Let's do it a bit louder and a bit faster. Are you all ready? Okay, go. How many? Please, don't disturb. Don't try to be too smart, Don't disturb it, How many? Sorry? 5,000. How many of you said 5,000 first? Come on. Yeah. Right. Okay, very good. But what is the actual total? 4,100. Now, what is more logical than counting? I'm getting you to count. And yet, for those of you who are here for the first time, you counted 5,000. Yeah. So, did you count 5,000 just now, sister? No? You got 4,100? Yeah? Okay, some of you were alert. So maybe your meditation is working. You should give yourself a little pat on the back. Your meditation must be working. But for the rest of you who actually counted 5,000, yeah, you were hypnotized. This is actually the hypnotic effect at a very logical level, right? You were concentrating on adding the numbers. And in the process of concentration, the way I showed the number was swinging between 1,000 and a small number, 1,000 and a small number. 4,090, when a small number came out, you automatically switched to 5,000. So your mind was concentrating on the counting. And in your concentration, you fell into hypnotic state. For those of you who are first time and you've seen this for the first time and you counted 4,100, congratulate yourself. Your meditation is working. You should be very happy about that. Okay, good. So now you realize that it's so easy to fall into hypnotic state. And this is called the rhythmic pattern of hypnotic induction. People can easily be induced. Yeah. So I'm going to use this to explain a bit more about hypnosis, about how the brain actually puts images together, right? So I want you to take a look at this picture and you can see there are many elements in this picture. First, there are many different colors. So there's one part of the brain that processes colors. Secondly, there is an outline of a person. So there's another part of the brain that is processing the outline of that person. Thirdly, there are individual objects, words at the bottom, scarf at the top, eyes, nose. So there is another part of the brain that is processing the recognition of individual component objects. And then there is different shading, right? Looking at the face, the face color is darker in the behind and the cheek, and brighter in the forehead, and so on. So there are different shades. So another part of the brain is processing shades. Another part of the brain is processing the letters and the words. Another part of the brain is trying to recognize what the word is. What does it mean? You're giving meaning to the words. Another part of the brain is trying to recognize the face. Who is this? Giving meaning to, oh, I know this person. So there are as many as 100 different parts of your brain simultaneously processing this image that you're looking at. Not only that, there is also something else. I want all of you to focus your eye, focus on seeing both eyes of Siti Nurhaliza. Can you see sharply and clearly both her eyes? Or is your vision darting back and forth between the two eyeballs? Are your eyeballs darting back and forth between her two eyes? Pay attention to your eyes. What is happening? Are you seeing both her eyes at the same time? Or are your eyeballs darting back and forth? How many of you think you're seeing both her eyes at the same time? Because if you are, I would like to recommend you to see Sister Beeling after the meditation retreat to get your eye examined. Okay? How many of you realize that your eyeball is darting back and forth? Yeah? So that is really what happened. We are not seeing the complete picture. The eyeball is darting back and forth, picking up bits and pieces in that image. So there is another part of your brain taking all these bits and pieces, trying to put it all together. So there's various parts of your brain doing so many things. As many as 100 different parts of your brain trying to put together this complete image. So what happens then? There is no central part of your brain that is putting it all together. All the different parts of your brain, the 100 different parts of your brain are coordinating because of the synchronization. There is a frequency, rhythmic frequency in the brain that is synchronizing all the different parts of the brain working together. It is self-regulating. There is no conductor, like a conductor of an orchestra. There is no one part of the brain doing it all. Okay? And all these different parts of the brain are synchronized together through brain waves. Brain wave is the common name for it, but it's actually called synchronous oscillatory frequency. And that can be measured using EEG. All right? Now let's take a look at how this was explained by the Director of Research of Max Planck Institute for Brain Research in Germany, where he was explaining to the Dalai Lama. In his explanation, he says the brain is highly distributed dynamic system that lacks a singular convergence center. That means there is no one part of the brain that is bringing it all together. And there is no coordinator. There is no observer. There is no part of the brain coordinating or observing. In fact, he even went on to say, and that is Dr. Wolfsinger, the Director of Research at Max Planck Institute for Brain Research. He even went on to point out, based on all the scientific evidence, there is no evidence whatsoever that there is a self in the brain. The self does not exist in the brain. So how does it all actually work? The scientists have not yet come to proper understanding yet. But they have come to the conclusion that 100 different parts of the brain, somehow they are self-coordinating. There is no central coordinator.
areas of the cerebral cortex, about 100 of them, which are interconnected very, very intensively, one with the other. But there is no evidence for a convergence center or for a pyramidal hierarchical organization. These areas, they deal with very different inputs, like from the eye, from the ear, from the touch senses. And then there are areas which belong to the so-called limbic system, which attach emotional connotations to the contents of conscious experience. So there is no single place in the brain where an observer could be located, or a command structure could be implemented, or where the self could have its seat. It's a highly distributed system in which many, many functions occur simultaneously, and there is no coordinator. They self-organize. So there is no coordinator, no observer, no seat of the self.
Basically, that is the conclusion of the brain research, right? That is what is happening in the brain. And brain waves are used to measure. So let's take a look at these brain waves. Under normal circumstances, when we are awake and paying attention, which some of you may be, then you are at this level called conscious awareness. Your brain wave is oscillating between 13 to 30 cycles per second. And if you are actually very critical, for those of you earlier on when you were counting and you were able to count correctly 4,100, your brain was actually operating at this critical alertness. You were very, very alert. You didn't fall into that hypnotic state. For the rest of you, you went below this, below the conscious awareness, because as you were counting. So there is a name given to each of these states. When you are consciously aware or critically alert, it is called the beta state. Now, when you become less than consciously aware, that means you're drifting into drowsiness, sleepiness, the onset of drowsiness and sleepiness. That is called unconscious awareness. You are sort of aware, but you're not really consciously aware. And that is often called subconscious. Below 13 hertz, right? And that is called the alpha state. As it drifts lower, in fact, this alpha state, for some of you, you might be in this state right now. If you're not really paying attention to what I'm saying, you're probably in this unconscious awareness state, on the verge of dozing off. And then you doze off, you fall asleep, and that is in the sleep state, which is below 8 hertz, and lower than that is the deep sleep state. So the name for the sleep state is called theta, and the name for the deep sleep state, which is commonly called short wave sleep, right, where the brain is oscillating at very slow wave, right, that is called the delta state. So basically this is when the brain is slowing down, right? And this is where hypnosis works. Hypnosis works in this range. But if you are meditating and you are paying introspective attention to what is happening in your mind, you turn your attention inwards and you are observing clearly what is going on in your mind, you are in the zone, then you are beginning to move up into this gamma state. And in that gamma state, higher up, there is the insight state, right? So from introspection to insight. So when your mind becomes critically alert and then you continue to practice and sharpen your mind, at the sharpest level, it moves into introspection and insight state. I spoke about this critical factor. And this is what happens. Critical factor is at that point in time separating the critical alertness and conscious awareness. When it is above the critical factor, then your mind is working towards introspection. That means when you are meditating and you're paying introspective attention in your meditation, then your mind is operating above the critical factor. If not, your mind is operating below the critical factor, and this is what happens below the critical factor. Hypnosis. You go into hypnotic state. And transcendental meditation also operates in that range. Not only transcendental meditation, right, but chanting meditation, right? When you're not paying attention. People who use chanting meditation and they are just chanting the words without understanding, without realizing what they're chanting, that means they become robotic. Then they are actually also in this hypnotic state where it's below the critical factor. But when you practice what is called samatha meditation and vipassana meditation, your mind is moving higher and higher into the gamma state, right? It's only when you practice vipassana meditation that it is going into the insight state. But otherwise, it is hovering at the critical alertness towards the introspection state. So this is really what happens when you meditate, and you are meditating properly. Alright. So let's listen to what Richard Davidson has to say about Buddhist meditation. And he is using Tibetan compassionate meditation as one of the examples. This sound is not happening. Something is wrong with the sound system. Just
in our work with long-term Buddhist meditation practitioners, we found that
something is wrong. Try again, one more time.
In our work with long-term Buddhist meditation practitioners, we found that meditation in our work with long-term Buddhist meditation practitioners, we found that meditation is associated with marked increases in electrophysiological signs of activation, specifically in the gamma frequencies. These are high frequencies in the brain electrical recordings. And particularly in the prefrontal cortex, which we see as important for certain aspects of regulating emotion.
So basically what he's saying is that when we meditate with Buddhist meditation, the brain wave is actually reaching that gamma state, and especially in the prefrontal cortex where it is synchronizing according to this gamma range. And this prefrontal cortex is fully in sync, is synchronized with the rest of the brain, which means the whole brain is functioning in a well-synchronized manner, like an well-oiled machine, where therefore with this synchronization, your thoughts become cohesive. Your thoughts become very clear. Your mind is very sharp, very clear, and your thoughts are very cohesive. That is what Buddhist meditation does. You are no longer in this dream state, right, where the thoughts are not cohesive. When brainwave goes below critical factor, the thoughts are not cohesive, and then the brainwave slows down, and then the thoughts make you go into a more and more drowsy state. So therefore, meditation brings you to above this critical factor level. So overall, when we look at the chart here, hypnosis is going below critical factor, meditation is going above. So I'm going to share with you some of the... we can skip that. Yeah. So let's take a look at the comparison between hypnosis and meditation. In terms of induction, for hypnotic induction, It depends very much on imagination and expectation. In the case of meditation, it is the introversion of attention. And in terms of mental activity, what goes on in the mind, for hypnosis, it is an experiential engagement with the mental imagery. That means the sensory objects. You are engaging, you're interacting with the sensory object, right? And this may even lead you to hallucination. You begin to imagine things that may not be happening. So that is hallucination. In the case of meditation, this introspective awareness is totally withdrawn from sensory objects, memory, and imagination. In your mental state, for people who are falling into hypnotic state, the mind is in this guided, altered state of consciousness, guided by imagination. So this is a lagging mind. Whereas in the case of meditation, your mind is introspectively alert. Therefore, it is in this introspective, altered state of consciousness which is leading mind. You are observing whatever that arises as it arises. You are able to observe it. So your mind is leading. Whereas you are following it, then your mind is lagging. And the brainwave, one is slowing down, the other one is speeding up to the gamma range. In terms of deep relaxation, in the case of hypnosis, relaxation comes from the slowing down of brain waves. By slowing down to the theta and the delta range, the person begins to fall into drowsiness and deep sleep state. In the case of meditation, relaxation comes from the cessation of the affective process. That means your emotional mind has completely gone to sleep. Your emotional mind is no longer aroused. And you have complete stillness of the cognitive process. Your thinking mind is clear and still, right? When it is clear and it is still, it is able to observe every little thing that is happening. And finally, your frame of mind. For a person whose mind has fallen into hypnotic state, he is an adventurer and a dreamer. So, whereas for a person who is meditating properly, correctly, he is an observer and introspector. Right? So basically, these are the major differences. I'm going to share with you some of my own experience. So this is very important for people to understand. I have gone through it myself, and I realized what has happened when I was having difficulty meditating. First, understand what is the purpose of your meditation. The purpose of meditation is the cultivation of your mind, the purification of your mind. The purpose of meditation is not about entering into these jhana states, seeing the nimitta or attaining nibbana. Don't think about nibbana. Don't think about jhana. Don't have any thoughts about what you want to accomplish. Just practice it purely and purify your mind. Because when you begin to have these desires to enter this jhana state, the desire to experience jhana gives rise to unconscious arousal that may arise in the midst of meditation, leading the mind to hallucinate the experience. You begin to hallucinate your jhana experience. You think you're entering jhana, but you're not. You're hallucinating it, right? You think something is happening, but actually it is all hallucination. Because you're no longer observing. Next is have no expectations, especially expectation of seeing the nimitta, this thing called bright light. Some people explain this as some kind of bright light. When you meditate and you are successful, you are able to see this bright light becoming brighter and brighter. There are a lot of people describing this experience even. All this, I'm sorry to say, is nothing but hallucination. When you begin to expect to see the nimitta, the expectations of seeing this nimitta leads to unconscious arousal of your imagination and hallucination. You will definitely enter into hypnotic state and begin to hallucinate the seeing of this nimitta. If you see something in your meditation, I'm sorry to say you are hallucinating already. You must observe, right? Don't see this nimitta arising and so on. And most importantly, remain consciously attentive and introspective. Because once you lose this introspective attention, You allow the emotions to arise. You allow your subconscious mind to take over. The affective process arises and begins to disturb your cognitive process, your thinking mind. Remember, your amygdala has very strong connections to your prefrontal cortex. Any arousal of the amygdala can disturb your prefrontal cortex, and you can no longer meditate properly then. And this leads to emotional arousal, imagination, or even hallucination. So please, I hope you understand these are very important things to pay attention to when you begin to practice your meditation. And what happens? What are the signs? Signs of drowsiness and sleepiness is an indication that you may be beginning to fall into hypnotic state. Not that you are deep into it, but be aware. When you begin to feel drowsy, you have to do something. Straighten your back, then start again. Right? If it is just a mild drowsiness. Signs of emotional arousal or excitement, that means you begin to experience various emotional states. Pleasure, displeasure, fear, anger, anxiety. When you begin to feel that, it is your affective process taking control. Or any sign of physiological changes, that means your heart is beating faster, your breathing becomes more rapid, your muscles become more tense in your arms and your face or your neck and your shoulders. And also you may begin to perspire and things like that. Or you find yourself engaging or interacting with the mental object. That means you are into hypnotic state already. You have become part of this mental experience, especially if you feel you begin to experience what you were observing instead of simply just observing and aware. Attention has now turned into experiencing, engaging, right? So what do you do when that happens? You need to reset your meditation practice. The best way, when you find yourself becoming very sleepy, you find yourself sweating, perspiring, or your heart beating faster, or you find muscles very tense in different parts of your body, then stop your meditation for a little while, right? And go and wash your face. And then you may take a brief walk, or better still, do walking meditation. Change to walking meditation. And when you feel that you have recovered from it substantially, then you can resume your sitting meditation. And always avoid doing sitting meditation when you are physically tired or exhausted. Okay? So I think that ends my presentation. So I think that's all I have, Bhante, for now.